The footage is grainy, but clear enough. It's residential security camera footage from a quiet neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. Timestamp November 14, 2019, at 8:47 p.m. The camera is mounted above the garage of a large single-story home with desert landscaping and a circular driveway. The motion sensor activates as a silver Lexus pulls up along the side of the house. A man steps out. He's in his late 40s, wearing a polo shirt and jeans. He doesn't look around. He doesn't hesitate. He walks directly to the side entrance, pulls a key from his pocket, and lets himself in. The door closes behind him. The camera continues recording for another 30 seconds, then goes dark. At the time, no one thought anything of it. This man had been coming and going from that house for years. But this particular night, this single moment captured on camera, would later be identified as the last time anyone could account for $6 million. His name was Kevin Harmon. He wasn't family. He wasn't a business partner. He was a friend, or at least that's what everyone believed. Kevin had met the homeowner, a man named Richard Calloway, almost 7 years earlier at a community event in Scottsdale. Richard was in his late 70s, then recently widowed, and visibly struggling with the isolation that comes after losing a spouse of 43 years. Kevin was friendly, attentive, and easy to talk to. They struck up a conversation about golf. Within a few months, they were meeting regularly. Kevin would drive Richard to doctor's appointments, help him with errands, and stay for dinner. Neighbors saw them together often. There was nothing suspicious about it. Kevin seemed like a decent guy who genuinely cared. Richard Calloway had built his wealth the old-fashioned way. He owned a chain of auto parts stores across Arizona and New Mexico, and by the time he sold the business in 2005, he had accumulated significant assets. Real estate in Scottsdale, Palm Springs, and Sedona. Investment accounts. Municipal bonds. Cash reserves. All told, his estate was valued at just over $6 million. He had 2 adult children, both living out of state. His son, Eric, was a software engineer in Seattle. His daughter, Monica, was a high school principal in Austin. They called on holidays. They visited maybe once a year. Richard never complained about it, but people close to him could tell he felt forgotten. Kevin filled that gap. He showed up. He listened. He remembered details about Richard's life that even his own children didn't know. What medication he was taking. Which physical therapist he preferred. What time he liked to eat dinner. Over the years, Kevin became less of a friend and more of a necessity. Richard's health was declining. His memory wasn't what it used to be. He had trouble managing bills, keeping track of appointments, and handling the small tasks that used to be automatic. Kevin took care of it all, and Richard trusted him completely. That trust became official in the spring of 2018. Richard updated his will. It wasn't a secret. He told his children about it during a phone call, though the conversation was brief and awkward. He explained that Kevin had been there for him in ways they hadn't, and that he wanted to make sure Kevin was taken care of. The new will left 40% of the estate to Kevin. The remaining 60% was split between Eric and Monica. Richard's attorney, a man named Gerald Pitoen, who had handled Richard's legal affairs for over 2 decades, prepared the documents. Everything was signed, witnessed, and filed properly. It was legal. It was final. Eric and Monica were stunned. 40% of $6 million meant Kevin was set to inherit nearly $2.5 million. They didn't know Kevin well. They had met him a handful of times during visits, and he had always been polite, even helpful. But this felt wrong. They called their father and tried to talk him out of it. Richard got defensive. He said they didn't understand. He said Kevin had earned it. The conversation ended badly, and the distance between Richard and his children grew even wider. But Richard wasn't entirely at peace with his decision. In the months that followed, small things started to bother him. Papers he remembered signing were missing. Bank statements showed withdrawals he didn't recall making. When he asked Kevin about it, Kevin always had an explanation. A bill that needed to be paid. A repair on one of the rental properties. Richard wanted to believe him, so he did. But doubt had crept in. The cameras started picking up changes too. Richard had installed a basic security system years earlier, mostly for peace of mind. There were cameras outside the front and side entrances, and one inside the hallway near his office. The footage was stored locally and automatically overwritten after 30 days unless someone saved it. No one was actively monitoring the recordings. No one had a reason to. But looking back, investigators would later pull archived clips that told a very different story than the one Kevin had been telling. In August of 2019, the cameras captured Kevin entering the house late at night, well after Richard had gone to bed. He went into the office. The hallway camera shows him opening the filing cabinet, removing a folder, and sitting at Richard's desk for nearly 40 minutes. He left with the folder. 2 weeks later, he returned and did it again. Then again. These visits happened at least 6 times over a 3-month period, always late, always when Richard was asleep. Kevin had a key. He had access. And he knew where everything was. On the surface, Kevin's behavior didn't look criminal. He was managing Richard's affairs. That's what he had been doing for years. But the frequency and the timing suggested something else. He wasn't just helping. He was preparing. Richard's health took a sudden turn in early November. He had been dealing with high blood pressure and minor heart issues, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Then, on November 10th, he was admitted to the hospital with chest pain and shortness of breath. Kevin was the one who called 911. He rode in the ambulance. He stayed at the hospital. Eric and Monica were notified, but by the time they booked flights, Richard had been released. The doctors said it was a mild episode. They adjusted his medication and sent him home with instructions to rest. Kevin brought him back to the house and stayed with him that night. 4 days later, on November 14th, the silver Lexus appeared on camera at 8:47 p.m. Kevin let himself in through the side door. According to what he later told police, he stayed for about an hour, made Richard some soup, helped him into bed, and then left. The cameras show him leaving at 9:52 p.m. He was carrying a leather messenger bag that he hadn't brought in with him. Richard Calloway was found dead the next morning. A housekeeper arrived at 9 a.m. and discovered him in his bedroom. He was lying peacefully in bed, as if he had simply passed away in his sleep. The medical examiner ruled the death natural causes, consistent with his age and medical history. There was no autopsy ordered. No investigation opened. Richard was 83 years old with a documented heart condition. His death, while sudden, was not suspicious. Kevin made the funeral arrangements. He notified Eric and Monica. He was present, somber, and respectful at the service. He gave a short eulogy about how much Richard had meant to him and how grateful he was for their friendship. People in attendance said it felt genuine. Then the money started disappearing. Within 2 weeks of Richard's death, Kevin accessed the estate accounts. As a named beneficiary with shared access to certain financial instruments Richard had set up, Kevin had the legal authority to begin transferring funds. But instead of waiting for the probate process to formalize everything, he moved quickly. $250,000 was transferred from Richard's primary checking account into an account Kevin controlled. Another $180,000 was withdrawn in cashier's checks. Investment accounts were liquidated. Property deeds were transferred. By the end of December, more than $1.3 million had been moved, spent, or hidden. Eric and Monica didn't realize what was happening until they tried to access their father's estate records in early January. Their attorney informed them that significant assets were missing. When they confronted Kevin, he said he was managing the estate as Richard had wanted. He claimed Richard had given him verbal instructions before he died. He said it was all legal, but he couldn't produce documentation, and the timeline didn't add up. That's when the family hired a forensic accountant and a private investigator. They started pulling records, bank statements, property filings, security footage. And that's when the CCTV recordings became critical. The camera from November 14th was reviewed frame by frame. Investigators noticed the messenger bag Kevin left with. They cross-referenced that with timestamps from other cameras in the neighborhood. One camera, mounted on a neighbor's property across the street, captured Kevin's Lexus leaving Richard's driveway and heading south. Another camera at a nearby gas station showed the same vehicle stopping briefly before continuing on. That footage was time-stamped 10:08 p.m. Kevin was supposed to be going home, but according to cell tower data subpoenaed later, his phone pinged a location 30 miles east near a storage facility in Mesa. Investigators obtained a warrant for the storage unit. Inside, they found boxes of documents, financial records, blank checks with Richard's signature on them, some dated weeks before his death, copies of revised legal documents that had never been filed, and a handwritten ledger that detailed transfers Kevin had been making for over a year, long before Richard died. The case shifted from probate dispute to criminal investigation. Detectives with the Scottsdale Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit took over. They interviewed Kevin multiple times. His story began to change. At first, he said Richard had approved everything. Then he admitted that some of the transfers happened without Richard's knowledge, but insisted Richard would have wanted it that way. Eventually, his attorney advised him to stop talking. The cameras told the rest of the story. Additional footage was recovered from inside Richard's home. The hallway camera had captured more than just late-night visits. It showed Kevin moving through the house with confidence and purpose, opening drawers, removing files, and making phone calls in rooms where Richard couldn't hear him. One clip, dated October 22nd, showed Kevin holding up a document to the light, comparing signatures. He didn't know the camera was recording. But the most damning footage came from the night Richard died. The medical examiner had ruled natural causes, and there was no reason to suspect foul play. But when investigators re-examined the timeline using the security footage, something didn't fit. Kevin said he left at 9:52 p.m. The camera confirmed that. But another camera, one installed near the back patio that Kevin apparently didn't know about, showed him returning at 11:34 p.m. He used his key again. He was inside the house for 18 minutes. Then he left and didn't come back. Richard's body was found the next morning. He had died sometime during the night. The exact time couldn't be determined, but Kevin had been in the house hours after he claimed he left, and he never mentioned it to anyone. Prosecutors couldn't prove Kevin caused Richard's death. The medical evidence didn't support it, and there was no autopsy. But they could prove fraud, theft, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Kevin was arrested in March of 2020 and charged with 23 counts, including wire fraud, forgery, and financial elder abuse. His bail was set at $500,000. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution presented the CCTV footage, the financial records, and testimony from Richard's family, neighbors, and former attorney. They argued that Kevin had systematically manipulated Richard over the course of several years, isolating him from his children and positioning himself to inherit a fortune. They showed the jury the footage of Kevin entering the house late at night, the storage unit full of forged documents, and the timeline that contradicted everything Kevin had said. Kevin's defense argued that Richard had willingly included him in the will and that the financial transactions were authorized. They tried to paint Eric and Monica as bitter children who had neglected their father and were now trying to reclaim money they didn't deserve. But the cameras made that argument impossible. The footage was cold, factual, and impossible to explain away. Kevin Harmon was convicted on 19 of the 23 counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to repay over $2 million to the estate. Eric and Monica were able to recover some of the assets, but a significant portion of the money was never found. Kevin had moved it offshore, hidden it in shell accounts, or spent it before anyone realized what was happening. The case became a cautionary tale in Scottsdale and beyond. It was covered by local news, true crime podcasts, and eventually picked up by national outlets. People were horrified not by violence, but by the quiet, calculated betrayal. Kevin hadn't used a weapon. He hadn't threatened anyone. He had simply been patient, present, and trusted. And he had used that trust to take everything. Richard Calloway had been a successful man, a devoted husband, and a father who, despite the distance, had tried to live his final years with dignity. He had believed in Kevin because Kevin had shown up when no one else did. That belief cost him everything. The saddest part is that Richard never knew. He died thinking Kevin was his friend. The footage from November 14th at 8:47 p.m. still exists. It's stored as evidence now, part of a court record that will remain sealed for years. But for anyone who watches it, the moment feels different. It's no longer just a man entering a house. It's the beginning of the end. It's the moment trust became theft. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we let closest, the ones we never think to watch, because we assume they're watching out for us. Greed doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look like a crime. Sometimes it looks like care. Sometimes it sounds like friendship. And sometimes it's only the cameras that tell the truth.